Okay, I'm going to call the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority Redevelopment Agency meeting for December 5th to order. We're going to start with our study session on the Sustainability Plan, and I don't think the name is correct, but we'll go with Jennifer Savage for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. The 2020 General Plan directs the town to develop a greenhouse gas, or GHG, emissions reduction plan. The town authorized an agreement with the Planning Center, DC&E, to prepare the sustainability plan that will serve as the town's GHG emissions reduction plan. The consultants have established a GHG emissions baseline year, began to prepare the inventory for both the town and community-wide inventory, and created a preliminary list of sustainability plan measures. That preliminary list of measures were reviewed by town staff in all departments. The purpose of tonight's Town Council study session is to obtain your feedback on the preliminary measures to determine what measures are appropriate for further consideration in the Town of Los Gatos Sustainability Plan. With that, I'd like to introduce and turn it over to Joanna Jensen and Nicole Vermillen from the Planning Center, DC&E.
Okay, sorry about that. We'll do a quick overview of sustainability planning in general, and then we'll talk about the sustainability plan for Los Gatos specifically. My goal tonight is, as Jennifer mentioned, to really focus on the preliminary measures that you have before you. Specifically, the next step in our process here is going to be quantifying the emissions reductions that could be achieved from these measures, as well as the potential costs of each one of these measures and the benefits of each measure. And so before we put a lot of work into looking at these measures, we want to find out from you whether or not you think they are appropriate to consider. So tonight, if you see any that you really feel like should be taken off the table right now, we want to do that so that we can focus on those measures that you think are most appropriate and most effective for Los Gatos. So climate change, obviously, I think we're all aware this is a topic that is controversial. What science believes, current science believes that greenhouse gases are emitted through both natural and human processes because of the chemistry of the greenhouse gases themselves and the Earth's environment. Sometimes those gases are trapped in the atmosphere and they make the temperature warmer. And this creates the effect of global warming, which of course has a number of side effects in terms of weather patterns and other effects. So sustainability planning is one of several avenues to address these potential changes in our environment. Specifically in terms of what local governments can do, we can address the way that we plan for land use, transportation, and energy. And by reducing our dependence on foreign energy, by planning for ways to get people out of their cars and reduce vehicles miles traveled, we can reduce those greenhouse gases that are emitted through human activities and thereby affect our contribution to the potential phenomenon of global warming. The state of California has recognized this as an important issue to be addressed, and so there are a couple of state-level regulations that deal with greenhouse gas emissions and the need to plan for trying to reduce those emissions. AB 32 sets statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction target to get the state as a whole to 1990 levels by 2020. SB 375 was a subsequent law that establishes responsibility for planning at the regional level for each MPO and asks them to set regional targets MTC has set a regional target for the 9-county Bay Area, including Santa Clara County and Los Gatos. And SB 375 also addresses the aspects of land use and transportation specifically, and the contributions there to greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, to further implement these two state laws, the CEQA standards have been updated so that for jurisdictions that have a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan that's prepared and meets certain standards, which Los Gatos would meet, subsequent project level CEQA analysis of greenhouse gas emissions specifically is not required if that jurisdiction has a plan that's in compliance. If a jurisdiction does not have such a plan, then each individual project in that jurisdiction could be subject to requirements to prepare an individual greenhouse gas emissions analysis as part of its environmental review process. So there are CEQA streamline benefits to be had from preparing and adopting the type of plan that you're undertaking now. And then the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has similar standards for project level, both plan level and project level review, and certain standards that they would like local jurisdictions to meet in terms of having a plan in place and demonstrating compliance with regional targets. And so the sustainability plan for Los Gatos would ensure that you are in a position to meet each of these requirements and take advantage of any streamlining, CEQA streamlining benefits and Air Quality Management District regulations. So I want to talk a little bit about the plan and the components of the plan. The goal, as Jennifer already said, is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the town. This is triggered by the adoption of your general plan, which included action ENV 13.1. That action says that the town will adopt a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan before any specific plan is adopted, and also within 2 years of the adoption of your general plan, which happened in September 2010. So that would set a deadline of September 2012 for us to adopt the sustainability plan, which we are currently on track to achieve. The components of the sustainability plan will be a baseline inventory looking at the 2008 year. This will be based on, in part, on the inventory that was already completed by the town with the ICLEI a few years ago as part of a countywide measure to establish inventories for communities in Santa Clara County. We will then forecast your emissions in the year 2020, which is the target year of both AB 32 and of your sustainability plan. We look at the difference between those two and look at where you're projected to be in 2020, and then establish an emissions reduction target that we would like the sustainability plan to meet. And then a set of measures that would help you meet that target. And the measures are what we're here tonight to talk about in more detail. And then finally, an implementation plan establishing who will be responsible for the measures in terms of the town staff, a timeline, and again, an estimated cost of the measures. The inventory and forecast, just this to give you a sense of the types of ranges that we'll look at, will include emission sources over which the town has direct or indirect control. Some of those categories include transportation, i.e. emissions from cars and trucks driving through Los Gatos, energy use in residential and non-residential buildings, water and wastewater, including the energy needed to convey and treat water and wastewater, solid waste disposal. Solid waste emits greenhouse gases in a landfill, and so reducing the amount of solid waste in landfills can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then categories of other emissions, and that includes things like even lawn care equipment, for example, that don't fall into any of these other categories, or agriculture. I want to just highlight that not every activity that emits greenhouse gases is covered under this plan. Plane travel that residents of Los Gatos might take is not included, and that is, on a personal level, a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas that might be emitted by transporting food that is eaten in Los Gatos or consumer goods that are bought in Los Gatos are also not part of this plan, because they're really not something that the town has control over, and so we're not making a plan for how those types of activities would be affected. So I just wanted to try to give you a scope of what we're covering in the plan. I don't want to talk a lot about the numbers tonight, but I just wanted to give you a sense of where the town is right now in your emissions. And as you can see, the majority of the emissions that are currently happening in Los Gatos are from cars and trucks driving around. This does not, by the way, include trips just passing through Los Gatos on 85 or 17. This is only including trips that begin or end in Los Gatos. And this is a pretty typical profile for Bay Area community for the majority of emissions to come from transportation, and with the second highest category being residential energy use and then non-residential energy use. So I'm going to move right into the council discussion of the preliminary measures as soon as I take any questions that you have. But these are the topics of the measures that we're going to be discussing. And I will go through each one of these categories individually, and I want to ask for your feedback on the measures that you have before you. But before we do that, I want to see if there's any questions I can respond to.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, and this might be of staff. I think you said that we would have 2 years from, was it September of 2010, to develop our plan, and that no specific plans could be adopted prior to that time?
That's what your general plan says.
All right, and so then to staff, so that would mean that any North 40 specific plan would by definition be subsequent to whatever we do on this issue.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No?
Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we have this broken down at a very broad level, and as it pertains to the general plan and those types of things. But when you think of it as on more of a micro level, like should we be looking at gas-powered leaf blowers and polystyrene containers and school busing kids to school to eliminate some of those trips? How does that all fit into this equation?
Are you asking if those are examples of the kinds of measures that we might consider?
Yes, recommendations for the future.
Those are, I mean, we're here tonight to certainly accept any other suggestions for additional measures that you would like to see. And I think all of those are examples of types of measures that we could include. I should have introduced my colleague, Nicole Vermillion, earlier in my presentation. Nicole is the expert in modeling greenhouse gas emissions and air quality emissions. So I brought her with me tonight because she has a very scientific and quantitative knowledge of how an individual measure like that might affect your overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions. But all of those things that you mentioned, I think, are types of measures that could be included if the council feels like they're appropriate for us to look at for Los Gatos.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. This may be more of a question for the council, but or maybe it's for both the consultants and staff and council. How much should this plan be realistic in terms of things that we might actually have money and resources and time to do, and over what period of time? And how much is it an idealistic document that in 5 or 10 years we're going to look back and say, well, that didn't happen?
I can respond to that from a consultant's perspective. This is a different type of a plan from a general plan, and it's a very implementation-based plan. I mentioned the CEQA streamlining benefits, for example, and those are in place because the state and regional agencies believe that when a town adopts a plan like this, they are committing to a course of action that will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and that will have a real and measurable effect. And that's another reason why we model these emissions and we model what we expect to be the outcomes of adopting these measures, because we think that they're specific enough and concrete enough that they will result in changes that we can actually measure. And so I see this as a very realistic plan, and I would certainly encourage you to focus on measures that seem achievable, but also that build on the efforts that Los Gatos is already making as a leader locally and in the county in terms of sustainability. You're already doing a number of programs that already get you towards this goal, and I think you can continue that. But I would, I think in an ideal world, the plan would be achievable and realistic, but yet also, what do I want to say, ambitious.
Please,
If
go
I
ahead.
might follow up with two points. So, achievable over what period of time?
The horizon year for the plan is 2020, and that's to be consistent with the goals that are set in state law. You can also, and you're encouraged to look out beyond that horizon year, but we're going to set a target in this plan for where you would like your emissions to be in the year 2020. So even just in
So basically
less than
8
10
years.
years. Yeah.
Okay. And then, if I might, the second question is, so give me an example, and I'm going to move into, off of your page here, which is your first one. So, for example, you have Land Use 4, which is increasing land use intensity on Santa Cruz Avenue, Main Street, and Los Gatos Boulevard. How is that quantified? Not in terms of, well, both, in terms of how you would quantify what does intensification mean? And so how do you figure out what the reduction is in the emissions? And then secondly, intensify to what level?
Right.
It's such a vague, subjective word. So I'm struggling the combination of that with bottom line numerical results.
Right, and I think that that's an example of a measure where there's some measures that we're going to talk about tonight where they are very easier and harder to quantify, and the method and intensity with which they are implemented is what's going to determine how Nicole can measure them. So it may not be the case that every measure is extremely specific and possible to be modeled in one way only. And we're going to have to make some assumptions when it comes to the modeling. But I think, an example of whether or not you're performing that measure is whether or not you approve projects that are at least within the density range of the designations that are in that area, or are they even at the high end of the designations in that area? So it's not just a subjective thing, but are you approving projects that are at least as dense as what the town has established for the designations? Are you approving projects that are at the high end of that range? Sure. If you think that would be helpful, that's fine.
So as part of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we do look at land use intensification as a way to reduce vehicle miles traveled and trip generation. The transportation engineer, which was Fear and Pierce for this sustainability plan, is looking at some of the mechanisms by which land use intensification can result in reduced VMT and trip generation. And they've prepared tons of studies to this effect, and there are studies available as part of some of the research that has been done with SB 375 and AB 32. In addition, the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association has released guidance that details some of the reduction measures that you can take from doing things like land use intensification and how it reduces VMT and trips. So that's one component. And I did want to speak to one other thing. As part of a qualified climate action plan, a town needs to look at their greenhouse gas emissions inventory every 5 years or so to update, just in case, economic conditions change and they really can't be doing everything that they've identified in their plan because things have come up or there's barriers to implementing them. So as part of this greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecasting, we did take a look at the existing population, employment, and housing forecast to make sure that we're not over-projecting our emissions so that the town can really achieve their greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals for 2020 and beyond.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I'm sorry. So 2 or 3 things. So what you just said on the housing, that's based on those numbers in the housing element? Growth numbers in the housing element?
The actual numbers that we used are from the general plan forecast. So we took what was estimated for in the 2008
8-year, what was existing land uses on the ground, and then projections that were developed as part of the general plan for year 2020.
Which did include the housing.
Okay, so, well, let's put those numbers separate, because some of us consider those mythology, not, real numbers. But, so back to, I'm going to stick with intensification of land use, just as an example. It seems like that's based on two assumptions. One is that there's a significant population growth anticipated, which has not been true in Los Gatos. We're a very slow-growing community, only, 1 or 2% over the last 10 or 20 years. And that secondly, if you think of to do a compare and contrast, you take a San Jose or a Santa Clara, where you've got the typical suburban sprawl. And so having intensification that brings residents closer to services or services closer to residents, we don't have that problem. I mean, such a huge percentage of our population is already within walking distance, for example, of downtown or another commercial area. So I'm struggling again with the benefit of intensification in our particular situation.
I think it's also the case that, it's a slow-growing community and things don't change nearly as fast in Los Gatos as they do in San Jose. But when things do change, the town would be on record as saying, this is a place because it is close to services, because it's close to the Vasona Light Rail, because it's a place, because it's not in the hillside residential neighborhoods. This is a place where we think some intensification would be appropriate, and this is a good place to focus our efforts in the future when things do change.
I'm going to stop for now.
Okay.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I'd like to reference 375 and 32. AB 32 sets the ground rules. SB 375 is currently kind of directing the actual execution. I know as a member of the ABAG board, it's a major topic, ongoing issue for the board. And so much of it is related to the evolution of where development is going to take place, the jobs housing ratios, the intensification that is projected along the transportation corridors, particularly in the larger cities along those corridors, San Jose being the largest here in our area. And in that context, there is a lot of discussion, shall we say, or perhaps confusion about what the real direction will be. Even the projection of numbers of jobs to houses, that I think the original run at 375 said that San Francisco and Oakland were going to be the the primary jobs focus, and that now here in the Valley there's a move, particularly VTA is championing the move to say, this isn't an actual projection that we can buy into. So my question is, if SB 375 and its application is in some state of flux, and it's being discussed as we speak tonight within the other 9 Bay Area counties, how is that kind of ongoing evolution to be applied in our situation, where in effect it's almost stating in your proposal that SB 375 is lock and fix rather than a work in progress? How will we relate to that as we're trying to look at our sustainability issues?
Sure. And I very much understand that certainly the projections and the methodology for developing those for the Bay Area and the Bay Area Sustainable Community Strategy, which is required under SB 375, are all a work in progress right now. I think what is true about SB 375 is that it establishes that land use and transportation decisions contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and assigns responsibility to the MPOs for making plans that address those two topics specifically. So ABAG and MTC will create some sort of SCS. What the exact numbers are and how they're distributed is definitely still in flux there. Los Gatos' sustainability plan is not dependent on that document or those numbers. Your target, which I wasn't planning to talk a lot about tonight because I wanted to get your feedback on the measures, but the target for the emissions reductions that we will try to meet through this plan is really independent of any regional or of any numbers that could come out of the ABAG and MTC SB 375 process. So it will be a target for Los Gatos, and if more jobs are forecast for San Jose than for Oakland, that will not affect your plan.
All right, and then to follow up on Councilwoman McNutt's question, so as we go through this process, and we have a kind of a time limitation that's seems rather tight to me, actually, if we're looking at you know, just 1 year and plus from here, basically. Will we be able to actually, at the end of this process, when we establish our sustainability plan, will we be able to say that that is a realistic plan, or, as we have been discussing for several months now, this whole question of our housing element and HCD's expectations, and how those have been interpreted by ABAG, and how we know that those numbers are numbers that, I don't want to use the word phantom, but they are projections that we know will not be achieved, but we have fulfilled the expectation. Is there a parallel in this proposal that in our sustainability plan, for example, it seems to me North Santa Cruz is built out? I don't project us doing an awful lot of intensification of land use there. Are we going to be going through an exercise that, from your perspective, has value in and of itself, but may not necessarily produce product ultimately because of the constraints that are already built into our built-out community? Or is this something that you feel we can massage so that when we get to the end, there's an actual deliverable that we can be guaranteed we're going to achieve?
I certainly would not want to spend my time and your time creating a document that I don't think is useful to the town and that I don't think will have a meaningful effect over the next 10 years in the town. So what we've tried to do is present a wide variety of measures. Some of them may be more likely to occur than others. All of them can be, I think, a difference between the housing element numbers, which depend on development happening. These measures depend on, you know, individuals taking certain actions, and some of them depend on development happening, like the land use measures, but many of them are, for example, about town operations or purchasing decisions that the town makes. And so there are measures in here that really are at the discretion of the town and are completely within your control and your ability to affect. So I do think that the measures can have real results.
Thank you.
1 second, let me go to the manager, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think what Councilwoman McNutt and Councilman Przinski have brought up is really just the sort of feedback we're looking at for tonight, and Joanna can verify, is that this is kind of a laundry list of measures, and before we start going out to Sustainability Commission, the public, the Planning Commission, and spend significant time quantifying and developing these measures, we want to know which ones possibly are not worthy or we don't think are viable, so we can take them off the plate for now. And I think that's just the sort of feedback we're looking at you for tonight. And I'll look to Joanna to verify it, because we have no time to spend or desire to spend staff time, your time, public time, commission time, or consultant time on measures that the council thinks aren't appropriate for Los Gatos. And that's why we're kicking off this process with you, with the laundry list of options before we go into that commission and public discussion.
That's right.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Brzezinski has raised the issue with regard to SB 375 and AB 32, where it might be a fungible kind of thing. But what about CEQA? What about the requirements under CEQA? Are those like defined, and if we don't have a plan, we're going to have CEQA challenges, or is that also a moving target?
The CEQA guidelines seem a little bit more set to me, as far as I know. I'm not aware that those are something that's in flux. And I guess there's two sources of places where you can see CEQA benefits by going through this process. One is the CEQA challenges that you mentioned, and I think that certainly any environmental document in California that does not address greenhouse gases in a specific and a quantified way at this point, I think is subject to challenge. And what that means is that it really is a major benefit for a community that has a what's termed in the state regulations a qualified greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan in place, because when a community has a qualified plan in place and when a proposed project is consistent with that plan, then that project does not have to do a quantified analysis of its greenhouse gas emissions. And it can just be assumed to be consistent with the plan, and the plan is consistent with the state law, and there would be no significant greenhouse gas impacts.
Thank you.
Any other questions on council? Okay. Do we go to public comment, or?
We certainly need to allow an opportunity for public comment before the end of the study session. I didn't know if Joanna had additional comments on any of the measures, or if
No,
council
I'm ready
members
to
have
go
others.
right into talking about the measures, so public comment's fine with me now. You want to do that?
You want to do the measures first? Is that okay? Why don't we go through the measures, and then we'll do the public comment after that.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
So I think most of you were with us for the general plan review process, and I was proposing to do a similar approach tonight. So that means that I'm not going to read each one of these measures to you. I'm just going to go through the overall categories of them. And I'm going to focus on the community-wide measures. Your document has, I guess I shouldn't say that. Your document has two sets of measures, and I should have probably addressed this during the presentation. You have town operations measures and community-wide emissions reduction measures. I think we're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about the community-wide measures because that's what we are modeling. The town measures are simply measures that guide town operations specifically. Town operations are less than 1% of the overall greenhouse gas emissions within the borders of Los Gatos, and therefore these individual measures, the difference that they would make is a difference, but it's so small that our software is not sophisticated enough to measure them, model them individually. And so we don't need your same input on these measures at this time in terms of deciding whether or not we're going to model them, because they are relatively small and it's not possible to model. That said, I would certainly be happy to take any of your feedback on any of the town operations measures. And as we move into our discussion of the measures, I do just want to repeat what Jennifer said earlier, that both the town and the community-wide measures are ones that we drafted, and then they were reviewed by community development, parks and public works, and economic development staff here at the town. So these have been reviewed by your staff in addition. So any comments on the town operations measures before we move on to the community operations in more detail, or community-wide?
Seeing none.
Okay, great. So the community-wide emissions reduction measures fall into the categories that you see here up on your screen, and I'm just going to go through them category by category and ask for your comments by category. The land use and community design measures are up on the screen just for the benefits of our audience or folks watching at home. Are there any comments or questions about land use and community design measures?
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. On 1 and 2, I assume that those are talking about commercial buildings and commercial projects, and not commercial and residential?
You know, for land use 1 to require a principal functional entry that faces a public space, I guess I could imagine both of these are applying to an apartment building, for example, a multifamily building that was along a transportation, a more significant street.
Okay, so I think it needs to be clarified. I can't see requiring that for single family because I could see some issues with that. And the same thing on the projects on 2, if that's a commercial kind of thing.
So not an individual single family home, but even on number 2, I think this policy
But
could
multifamily
apply
over a certain number of units, or
Okay.
just a clarification.
Okay.
And should I just do all of mine in this section? And then on 4, as I was hinting at earlier,
Right.
I think Santa Cruz and Maine in particular are unrealistic to list out for intensification or this kind of effect that you're trying to achieve, we're trying to achieve. And 6, I would need some more clarification on what coordinate with the school districts actually means. And then 7, I think, is a waste of time because I can already tell you what they're going to say and we can't give it to them. Because it's all going to be about affordable housing at levels that we can't generate fast enough.
Okay. Removing Santa Cruz Avenue and Main Street from land use 4, any other, I don't know, I guess other council members, please step in.
I think
if
what I'd like to
any
do
of
is
these need more
if
discussion.
a council member has a disagreement with what they hear, that way they
Exactly.
can speak up as opposed to
That would be
polling
great.
every single one on each issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'll try and do what you said, sort of. I agree, though, on 6 and 7. To me, that would be a no. But the challenge I have with 5 and 4 is not only the areas, the streets listed, but the concept of the incentives to increase density. That would be something that I would be very cautious of implementing, and to have it here as something that will be done, incentivize, I would not be comfortable with. And plus, I look at what you have characterized as the effectiveness of these line items, i.e. low, medium, high,
Right.
and tended to look at more seriously the ones that were high.
Sure.
So when you have something like incentivize for intensity and have it as medium, that gives me pause.
Okay, sure. I think that's probably a useful way to look at these. If this is a measure that you really have a lot of concerns or reservations about, and it has a low magnitude of a measurable reduction, that would probably make sense for one that we could go ahead and eliminate. In terms of the intensity, I do want to clarify that in the intent of Land Use 4 is not to increase density above what's allowed today, but simply, as I was saying earlier, to encourage any development to be at least within or at the upper range of the density that is already allowed by existing general plan designation and zoning. So the intent here is not to increase intensity above what is currently allowed, but simply to meet that intensity. And again, I think these are another column that I just want to make sure makes sense is the source column where we reference general plan policies. And we did, obviously we're very familiar with their general plan, and we did try to craft these measures to be measures that we felt were consistent with policies that the town has already adopted in your general plan. I also wanted to go back to a comment that Councilmember McNutt made about the school districts in LU6, and the wording here came from our concern that we were aware that obviously the quality of the local schools is of paramount importance in Los Gatos, and close coordination with the school district is seen as a very important tool for making sure that that quality is maintained. And we're aware that the school districts feel that they're very close to or exceeding their capacity, and so a measure that calls for intensification of land use could cause concern for the school districts or others in town. And so we want to make sure that while we're trying to meet greenhouse gas reduction goals on the one hand, we are not causing problems with the town's goals of maintaining very high quality schools on the other hand. So that was the intent of that language, simply to make sure that school districts are kept in the loop, which I know you already do.
Okay, anything else? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, so from the perspective of just bullet 4, the way you've interpreted this is just to expect that whatever degree of intensity we expect currently, that that will be maintained at the higher level if a development comes in requesting a lower intensity. like that's ever happened. But in terms of this and the issue of North Santa Cruz, I think we run into a philosophical problem at this point, because we don't see intensity necessarily as a significant value for many segments or many areas in our community. We see this as, in some ways, creating issues that are to be dealt with, such as, well, the intensity of use. So from the perspective of how we are looking at this and what we're expecting to derive ultimately, I think we may have a difficulty with those components that call out higher intensity of use. And I think that this is one area we're going to run into a conflict with SB 375, because it does call for intensification of use, particularly along transportation corridors. So I'd like to put that as a discussion that we might have to clarify really what we want as a community, so that the character of our community is not impacted by this particular mandate, if you will. I also, on another bullet, the one about the schools, I think we should work with the school districts. I think that I do not want to take that off the plate, because it's obvious that that separate government entity has certain requirements and some things that have proven to be problematic for us in terms of how we're looking at our own development process. And so the coordination with the schools, to me, is a very significant outcome, but I can't project what it's going to look like. I just think that we do have to maintain that projection.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I agree. We have been, and I believe will continue to coordinate with the schools. My concern about LU6 was the reference to intensive development.
Okay. Anything else on land use? We'll
Okay.
move on to transportation.
That's right. Any comments or questions on transportation measures? Let me.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
All right, TR2, which would be the provide a fixed route subscription shuttle system. I guess that's the second bullet, isn't it? Is the proposal that the town will provide the shuttle system?
I think that there are some, you would have to work that out with your local transit providers, with VTA, and see what could be feasible. That could be one could be one option, but obviously it has cost implications, which is something we're going to be looking at as part of this plan.
You know, I appreciate your hedge on this, because I don't think that it's in at least the projection of the next however many decades that the town will be the provider of a transportation system. And I think the VTA, as the provider of that system for the county, should be the agency that is questioned regarding the possibility.
Right.
Should there be a shuttle system, that would be wonderful. As VTA indicated an interest in providing that, other than the community buses that exist right now, which are only a small portion of an effective shuttle route. I don't see this realistically in our future, so I wouldn't think that it would be to our benefit to attempt to achieve that.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Generally, in this section, my concerns dealt with balancing what is a theoretically good idea with where's the money. And it was not only the shuttle system, but the bicycle parking facilities. Great idea, but I don't know how we can fit it into our budget. Getting rid of parking spaces, a concern. So generally, with many items, without going through it in detail, my concern was good idea, but if the expectation is that the monies will come from the town, it's going to be a very challenging idea.
Sure, and I think in transportation in particular, and this is something that I've talked to some of your Parks and Public Works staff about, is a place where there are, or certainly at least historically have been grant opportunities available for some of these things, and bike facilities is a great example of those. So part of what we're going to be doing in the implementation plan is looking at potential funding sources for these measures and also the potential cost of the measure. And so again, you'll be able to compare the benefit that you're getting from the measure in terms of its emission reductions with the potential cost to the town, and then whether or not that would be a cost that would need to be borne by the town's budget, or there may be other possible funding sources.
And I'm going to echo the Vice Mayor. I'm just not sure I'm in the, think it would be wise to eliminate any parking spaces in our downtown area. We're pretty short as it is. I don't, if the money was there from a grant or something like that, putting in high quality bicycle parking facilities would be great. But I'm just not sure I would want to remove parking spaces to make that happen. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So I had problems with one. I'm going to have problems with most of the suggestions that talk about using staff for additional responsibilities. We've already talked about the shuttle, the parking spaces, either parking spaces or reducing the parking requirement, I don't think is a good idea. Having an electronic sign that shows number of parking spaces, again, that involves two things. It involves an investment in putting in that kind of a system, and I don't think that it really fits in with the character of downtown, for example. You see those a lot in parking garages. And what I don't see here that I think would actually be really effective is some way of getting parents off the street, dropping off the kids and picking them up, because when you look at our generation rates, it's all about traffic, and the biggest traffic issues that we have in town are around the schools, morning and afternoon. So I don't know what that solution would be, but I think trying to figure out a way to address that would actually have some serious results.
Yeah, I remember that was a major issue during the general plan update, and in the absence of busing, what we talked a lot about are things like improving pedestrian and bicycle connections and safety and safe routes to school, efforts to help enable kids to walk and bike to school instead of being driven.
See, this I'm sorry, may I continue? This is where, coordinate with the school districts on an ongoing campaign to reduce the number of car trips going to each campus every day would really be something that I could get behind. I think that one really has some teeth in it.
Great.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Well, I think you hear a certain common theme here. This isn't one of the strongest categories, and I circled every one of the individual items as questionable, because I think we all realize that there is a traffic issue. We also know it's very specific in terms of date and time. So much of it relates to school traffic. Much of it relates to Highway 17, whether Highway 17 is open or closed at any particular time. And I don't see that as kind of a focus here. I see this as primarily if we can do some things to encourage bicycling, or we can encourage individuals to carpool to work, then we will be addressing the transportation issue. And I really think that that would be a minor component in relationship to where the real problem is generated. And I would like to see a relook at this particular section, and going back to the question, as Ms. McNutt points out, that we know the schools generate so much of the traffic. We know that there's seasonal traffic. We know that when we put these things in place, it's not going to eliminate the automobile as the primary transportation mode in town. And we're not talking about increasing parking opportunities. We're talking about decreasing parking opportunities, I assume, to incentivize doing some of these other things, such as biking or walking. All good, maybe been tried before, doesn't seem to have had much real effect. And so I would like you to take back this section and to do a review with the ideas that have been brought up here regarding where the traffic and complex traffic issues are being generated.
Okay.
Anything else on transportation? Okay.
Great, thank you. Green building is the next category. Oh, there you go.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I was just so surprised that I get to go first. Again, my overall impression of this is a section that could be very effective in the sense of the line items generally have a high magnitude of effectiveness. So generally, I think these are okay. The one that I had a problem with was GB6, which had a low level of effectiveness and appeared to require staff time doing a new thing. And the other one that was medium for me was GB7, again because of its medium effectiveness and the fact that it requires town expense.
Anybody else on green building? Okay.
Okay, renewable energy is the next category.
Anybody have anything on renewable energy? Got through 2 in a row.
Well, not so fast.
Great.
Okay.
Oh, slowing down.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
I would like to address RE3.
Okay.
And maybe this is more of a general response. I have difficulty with the word require. Not in my real life, but in kind of the concept of what we are attempting here. Because I think when we're using the word require as in RE3, okay, dependent upon the 20,000 square foot size, to incorporate solar and other energy generation, I think it's a commendable goal, but I would say from a philosophical perspective, I am not inclined to move in that direction. That is a requirement direction. I would rather see us look at this in more terms that might incentivize rather than require.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the Vice Mayor made the comment in the earlier section regarding the expenses that would be accrued as a result of doing some of the things that we're asking now. And I think in this particular time of our national as well as state and local development, things that require an additional expense have some additional consequences. And I am not willing at this point to make the move to make those required demands until there's further study about the actual financial consequence.
Okay. In general, we try to be more towards the end of the spectrum of requiring. I remember very similar conversations from our general plan update process. But because this is a quantifiable document, it's much more clear and easy what should be modeled when something is required rather than encouraged or incentivized. And that is the reason why this first draft of preliminary measures for you are more likely to say require rather than encourage. But this is exactly the reason why we were putting this language here for you to react to. So I just wanted to explain that background.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. And I think this is one of the RE3 is a good example of where I think the community process, public discussion process, will help us determine whether require is an appropriate word for us. Because how much pushback we get from the community in terms of the negative impact on something they might be doing, I think is helpful. So I'm actually kind of okay with leaving that in there in terms of the draft, just to spark discussion and dialogue, because it goes through so many steps before the final product, and we can pull it back at that particular point. But on that one, there's a couple later that I'm not going to agree with, but on that one, I would be fine with leaving it as required for discussion purposes.
Okay, right. And we haven't got to this part of my presentation yet, but the next step on this process will be a community workshop, and we'll be doing a very similar exercise of reviewing the types of measures that are under consideration.
Thank you, Mayor. So EC1 is one where mandate is in there, and I wasn't sure whether that meant on new construction, because I don't know how you would do enforcement unless Todd's going to go through every kitchen in the town to make sure that they're all energy efficient. But so I would just need clarification on that and how realistic that is for enforcement. And number two, again, it's a low effect, and having done these kinds of things, this is a whole lot of effort that I don't think we have staff resources to launch.
Councilmember, Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. And this section, I thought they were all okay with the exception of EC2.
Okay.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
EC4. The bullet I'm focusing on is the energy audits to be performed when residential and commercial buildings are sold. Now, I know we went to encourage. It was actually, I believe, mandate or require when we were working with the general plan initially. But I just want to point out this is one of the areas that we're going to have to be very strategic in how we approach it, because there was so much response about the requirements or even the encouragement of energy audits when you have a community that has such a long-term residential history, where you have very, very old homes, many of which are historic in nature, and the energy audit probably is going to say it's not too energy efficient, particularly if you're talking about some people who have been in these homes for a long period of time. And so if we were to encourage the audit, what's the outcome? I assume that when we looked at this initially, it was the energy audit itself would be a significant increase in the costs of doing business, of selling your home. So that's what I'd like to asterisk as a concern to be further explored with a great deal of caution about the real consequences for the housing that we have in this community and the age of so many of the houses.
Sure. Yeah. And this is, it's definitely a struggle, Los Gatos, because as you saw, residential energy use is your second highest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and it was really an issue to grapple with in the general plan update of how we are going to address energy efficiency in existing buildings. And no one wants to go around requiring people to make expensive upgrades that they're not voluntarily willing to make. So we are bringing this back from the general plan update. It has been softened from being a requirement, but I certainly well remember the controversy that surrounded it during the general plan update. But I think the issue of how to effectively improve energy efficiency in older homes in a community like Los Gatos is really a major issue that I think is worth grappling with. So I thought it was worth bringing back for discussion.
And then the last bullet under EC4, fund and schedule energy efficiency retrofits or tune-ups of existing buildings. A fund, would that be funded by government, funded by PG&E? Where would the funding source be?
Well, this action as a whole is to partner with PG&E. So I don't know if Nicole has any more information about specific funding sources, but this could be one that we'll look into during the implementation component of the sustainability plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to water and wastewater. Do we have anything? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. Number 7, back on public information campaign. Again, very time intensive for staff with a low expectation of result. And then on 9, how realistic is it to think that we're going to be able to connect to reclaimed water? We're a lot of miles away from the plant.
I don't know if there's, Christy or Todd is any more familiar with than I am with regional reclaimed water efforts.
Well, my first answer is probably only marginally more familiar. I did work with that with my time in San Jose, and I think like some of the arguments or issues, I should say, brought up with regard to transportation planning, this will be something that will probably have to be addressed more on a regional basis. I do recall that the reclaimed water pipeline does have in their probably 50-year master plan the intent to expand well throughout the valley. I don't know that West Valley is coming in the next 8 years, so it's something that may ultimately, once the backbone of the system is built and reaches out this far, this may be something that we'd be able to take advantage of, but we certainly can't be, our plan cannot be ahead of what the reclaimed water network is proposing.
Sure.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I concur with regard to WW6 and WW7. I see, even with encourage and implement, I see those as being having costs associated with the government for a very low level of effectiveness, as you've noted in that column. And I also concur with regard to WW9. I don't know how realistic it is to think that we are going to actually be able to have and use reclaimed water. And if you look in the last section of your notes, major infrastructure investments are necessary in order to do that on existing and new customers. Again, if you take all of those elements together, I would not see it as a priority, even though it might be a good idea at some point.
Okay, great.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
I agree with the Vice Mayor on that. This is the Purple Pipe plan. And I do believe there was some discussion of requiring the secondary pipe system to be installed once upon a time when we were talking about new development. Is that embedded in here in any one of these? I'm not requesting it. I was just curious if it appears here, because I go back to Mr. Capurso's comments. We're way downstream from the access to that particular regional facility, and I don't see us as bringing this forward as something that we would promote as a community at this moment in time.
There's not anything in these measures that would require purple pipes to be installed in new development.
Okay. Let's move on to solid waste. Are there any comments on solid waste? Going, gone. Open space. Councilmember Brzezinski.
OS1. I'd like to ask our Parks and Public Works executives which parks we intend to create our community gardens in, because I think that that's kind of what's stated in number 1, is that we will look for public easements, existing parks, right-of-ways, and schoolyards to develop community gardens. And it says appropriate locations, so I'm not ignoring that part. But I have difficulty in setting aside parkland for community gardens. And if the director would like to speak to that, I would appreciate it.
It would be difficult for us to set aside existing parkland. I think that's a very valid comment. I think, though, to have this as a longer-term goal over 8 to 10-year period, as development occurs in certain areas and opportunities are there, as you know, we've seen a community garden take root, for lack of a better term, at the church along Los Gatos Boulevard, which was a very appropriate site.
Yes.
There are other sites in town that may be appropriate in that they don't have any other use. We don't know what their appropriateness is in terms of a fit with the specific neighborhood. So I'm talking in general about some of the PG&E easements where there's not going to be any other development underneath them. We've seen community gardens turn up in those types of sites in other municipalities. We do have some open space areas maybe on the back side of some of our existing parks, like ones that come to mind would be parks like Worcester and Belgatos. We've also talked on the other side of the coin about looking for ways to take high water demand areas out of service. So I don't know that we could say that this needs to be carved out of the existing park inventory, but I think we can look at parcels that the town owns as the appropriate time, as you know, perhaps as adjacent development occurs, would be the appropriate time to look at that. But again, it would very likely, to echo some of the other comments that we've heard, it would very likely have to occur in conjunction with some type of adjacent development or other turnover of the land, because all things being equal, this is not likely an effort that we would take on our own just because of the resources involved.
Okay. I would appreciate if all of the director's comments would be embedded in this particular section.
I'll try to get most of them in there.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on open space? Purchasing, the one bullet item. Community action. Councilmember McNutt.
Just a small item, a monthly newsletter in CA3 is overly ambitious.
Okay.
Just reduce the frequency.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. I want to thank you very much for your input on the measures. This gives us very valuable direction as we move forward with the next steps of the project. And as you can see here, the next steps will be to publish the inventory and forecast, so you can see how the town is doing or was doing as of 2008, and how we predict you'll be doing in the year 2020 in terms of your GHG emissions. We're going to have a community workshop to explain to folks what the sustainability plan is and get their input on the types of measures that should be included in the plan. That's tentatively scheduled for sometime in January. We don't have a date set yet. After we get the input from the community, we're going to be working on refining the measures. We'll be quantifying the emissions reductions from these measures that you've looked at tonight. And then we'll combine those pieces, the inventory, the measures, and the quantifications into a draft plan that will be released in the summer of 2012. And then hopefully we're scheduled for adoption in August, ahead of the September deadline.
If I could just add that in addition to the input that we would be looking for from the public, we're also going to look for input from the Planning Commission and our Sustainability Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Abbott. Okay, we're running up against the clock, and keeping in mind that this will be public, but we do want to have time for public input. If anybody wishes to speak, we don't have any speaker cards, but anybody wish to speak on this item before we go any further? Seeing none, nobody's rushing to the microphone. I think you have what you need.
I do, and I thank you again.
All right, thank you. We'll take a recess and reconvene at 7 o'clock. Good evening. I'm going to reconvene the December 5th Joint Town Council Parking Authority and Redevelopment Agency meeting. I say reconvening because for those of you that weren't here for our scintillating discussion on the sustainability plan, we started at 5:30 this evening. I'd like to remind you all to turn off your cell phones, and Madam Clerk, or put them on silent, please. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here?
Councilmember Joe Przinsky.
Here.
Vice Mayor Barbara Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Rice.
Here. As we make a habit of, to start our council meetings, we have a young leader in our community to lead us in our pledge tonight. I'm going to ask Lindsay Kiala to start making her way up here, and I need a handheld mic as well. And while she's coming up, let me tell you a little about Lindsay. Lindsay is a second grader at Blossom Hill School. She sings in the Blossom Hill School first and second grade choir. She participates and supports events for the Justin Jolly Memorial Foundation and Special Olympics. She does gymnastics, plays soccer, basketball, and softball. She loves school and enjoys her many friends, and her favorite subject is art. And as a complete coincidence, because I had no idea Lindsay was doing this tonight, she happened to be the one that I chose from the audience to push the button to light the town Christmas tree last Friday night. And given the fact that you're here this evening and that you got to do that, if I were your parents, I'd run to buy a lottery ticket. Would you all please stand and let Lindsay lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic of which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lindsay, a big hand. Lindsay? One more time, a hand for Lindsay. She brought her own entourage this evening. That's pretty good. Okay, if you have an interest in speaking on any of the items on tonight's agenda, I'm going to ask that you fill out one of these buff cards that that are in front of you, and please give it to the clerk on my left, your right. We will start with council and manager matters. Any matters from the members of the council? Councilmember Leonardis.
Just wanted to thank all the volunteers who helped out with the Christmas parade this weekend, the staff, the police department, the participants, the whole community was one of the best I've seen, if not the best I've seen. It seems like it gets better every year, so just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Manager matters.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I too was going to congratulate town staff in Parks and Public Works and the police department for all of their work in advance of and during the holiday tree lighting and the holiday children's parade. Second, this Friday at 7:30 is another holiday tradition with the Friends of the Library hosting the South Bay Guitar Society for the annual holiday concert, which will be here in the council chambers starting at 7:30, and that will be preceded by a special Friends of the Library book sale in the lobby starting at 6:30. Last, this Thursday, December 8th, is the deadline for applications to the Parks Commission, the Building Board of Appeals, the Transportation and Parking Commission, and the Arts and Culture Commission. Applications are available on the town website. The board and commission interviews are currently scheduled for Monday, December 19th, just prior to a short council meeting, which will also include the appointment of new boards and commission members. However, there is a potential scheduling conflict that evening that could affect both commission applicant as well as public participation in the city town council meeting. Consequently, staff will be asking the council to consider adjourning tonight's meeting to a special meeting on Tuesday, December 20th, for board and commission interviews and appointments and any other town business that's appropriate to occur on that night, given receptivity of the involved parties and public noticing.
Okay, any questions on that for the manager?
With that, I'd now like to call up another seasonally appropriate opportunity, and that's Jessica Von Bork, our Economic Vitality Manager, for tonight's Did You Know?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, the holidays are upon us, but did you know all about the town's holiday parking hours? We have free valet parking available. It began on Black Friday, November 25th, and is extended through December 24th. It's in the public lot on Elm Street between North Santa Cruz University and University Avenues. The hours are Friday and Saturday from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. and on Sundays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. In addition, the town is offering some extended holiday parking hours this year within all the public lots downtown. These are lots 1 through 6. It is an increased free parking hours up to a maximum of 4. And please remember to shop locally and invest in all of your and support all of our town businesses. Shopping local keeps your dollars in the community and helps the environment by reducing our carbon footprint. And in the holiday spirit, our Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring carriage rides downtown until December 23rd. And they have also produced a free coupon book, which is available at the downtown valet parking kiosk as well as in the chamber offices downtown. And this includes some great offerings from our businesses townwide. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Van Bork? Seeing none, thank you. We're now going to move on to the consent calendar. Does any member of council wish to pull an item from consent? Vice Mayor Spector.
No, I don't, but I was wondering if we should have the fact that there was no closed session report needed.
That wasn't, you're right. Thank you. Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. There was no closed session scheduled for tonight's meeting, and therefore there's no report.
Thank you. Now, anything else on the consent agenda? Any member of the public wish to pull a consent item? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
I'll move the recommended action.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Passes unanimously. Now we have verbal communications, which is for any item that is not on tonight's agenda. And you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak on any item or anything that you wish to speak on. I have 2 cards. First is Joyce Sog.
Thank you very much. I didn't expect to be called quite this quickly. Good evening. My name is Joyce Sog. I live at 123 Bella Vista Avenue in Los Gatos. I've lived in Los Gatos for over 40 years. I think this is the second or third time I've addressed the council on an issue which just annoyed me, so I felt I needed to at least speak to you about it. A few months ago, I received a request from the library board, or the Friends of the Library, I'm not sure who, about sponsoring a shelf in the library. And I made a donation which for me was sizable, the understanding that there would be a little plaque on the shelf with 2 lines of text. And I received a call recently that told me that I could not put the 2 lines of the text because the town council had made some ruling that said I could only put my name on it. I don't know what you're doing micromanaging the library staff, but it seemed awfully silly, and I was really quite annoyed. That's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to hear from any of you if you have some explanation.
I think you might.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I would like to ask Assistant Town Manager Pamela Jacobs to meet with the Speaker immediately afterwards, but to highlight that we have, per Council direction, told the Friends of the Library that all donor recognition in the new library will follow the donor solicitation and contribution policy adopted by the Council. which does have specific parameters as to size of plaques and the wording that's allowed on those plaques. And that's in the policy previously adopted by council, and Ms. Jacobs can provide the details to the speaker.
Thank you. Next is Lee Quintana.
Good evening. Excuse me. I'd like to just read a letter which I've submitted to the Los Gatos Weekly Times as a letter to the editor regarding the library. Excuse me, because what was just said is a little disturbing to me too, because I've also purchased a plaque and I was not informed that I couldn't have it in memorial to somebody. But it was limited in words. So this is the letter that I wrote. Kudos to the Friends of the Library who have worked for over 20 years to make the dream of a new town library a reality for all of us. And kudos to the dedicated people who have worked to raise the $2.1 million to purchase furniture, equipment, and technology for the new library. This has not been an easy job given today's economy, but there is only about $200,000 left to raise. No other town service directly benefits as many residents as does the library. An incredible amount of collaborative thought went into ensuring the library will serve the needs of the Los Gatos residents now and into the future. The design included special attention to how today's students study, to provide a quiet place for adult reading, and to provide a very special place for young children. Please consider putting the Once in a Generation Fund on your holiday giving list. Encourage your kids to dream up a fundraising event. Any event will help. The amount is not important. Of course, if you want to give more, that's fine too. What is important is having participated in making the long overdue dream of the library a reality, pun intended. The Los Gatos Library has racked up an impressive number of firsts in the nation, especially as technology has changed the delivery of library services. But what impresses me the most is that in 1906, the Los Gatos Library was the first one-room library in California to set aside a corner of the reading room specifically for children. The children's room in our new library is a far cry from that corner. And believe me when I say it's going to knock your socks off. So please consider a donation to the Once in a Generation Capital Fund during this giving season. Thank you.
Town Manager.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council and Ms. Quintana, wanted to assure you the policy does allow recognition on donation plaques in memoriam of other individuals. There's several things that are allowed by town policy, and recognition for in memory of is one of the allowed uses of town plaques, and Ms. Jacobs can follow up with both of you on that. I also wanted to just highlight for the council that we met with the team managing the construction of the library today, and the library continues on time and on budget, targeted for a February 11th opening for this community, and that will be due to the hard work and dedication of the council and your leadership over the years designing and funding the project, and to your staff for bringing it forward, along with considerable support from the Friends Committee, and we are very, very supportive as they go into the final stages of their campaign for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to public hearings. Agenda item 6, introduction of an architecture and site application S11-054, property location 100 Costance's Court. Property owner is Mission Way LLC, applicant Sanford Havens, appellant David Kreitz. And is the appellant here? Seeing none. Is the applicant here? If you'd like to come forward and speak, you're allotted. Oh, I'm sorry. Staff report. I'll get it down soon, I'm sure. And you don't look like Heather Bradley either, but which is on my notes, but
We're just trying to cause problems.
CDD Director, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. The item before you tonight is the appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of amendment to a previously approved architecture and site application for the construction of a single-family home at 100 Costanzas. It took us a while to get that name. It was Costanzas Court. The subject lot is one of 7 lots within the Linda Avenue Planned Development Site, which was approved by the Town Council on September 20th, 2010. An architectural and site application was approved for the structure on September 22nd, 2010. Due to the discovery of a wood rat nest at the rear of Lot 1 during the environmental review process, the site plans and civil drawings had to be amended, which were not fully reflected on the architectural drawings. When you did then reflect those on the architectural drawings, we saw some problems that needed to be corrected. These changes created minor differences between the approved architectural and site application and the approved PD. The applicant is requesting to modify the architectural and site application to rectify these discrepancies and to make some architectural changes to the elevations. I'd call them more of a refinement of the architecture, since the PD architecture and site was really a very general level, not as specific as it is now. I want to quickly go through the proposed changes, and I would like to just bring your attention to the exhibits, particularly the exhibit, the third one from the left, this one here. As I talk through this, the purple line indicates the area that's proposed to change in terms of the footprint. The yellow area shows the deck area that's changed, and the heavy black line then shows what was approved back in September 2010. So that's a good reference. It shows how, as we'll get to on the east and west elevations, the windows have been modified because of having to reduce the depth of the home. So I'll go into that, but I just did want to draw your attention to that. The first change is the relocation of the front entry and dining room. While leaving the garage in place, the house actually had to be reduced in depth, and that's because the steps up to the porch did not allow adequate area for the required backup to on the driveway, the clearance that's needed. So the result was to push and we didn't want to push the house back any further because we abut up to that riparian area. So the house was actually reduced in length, and so that allowed them for clear access into the garage. However, that has changed then the orientation inside the house, which then required a reconfiguration of windows in the east and west elevations. And basically what you'll see there is some additions of windows on the first floor and reductions of windows on the second floor, which probably is a better thing for screening purposes also. The small changes in windows does not encroach any further into the setbacks that were established with the plan development application, which would be an issue if that was to happen. In this case, they're maintaining all required setbacks. You'll also notice there's a refinement of the architecture, or the, I more so say the materials. It's still the stucco with the siding, but there's a little more detailing involved in that also. On the rear deck has actually been reduced because it was also conflicting when the civil plans were drawn. It was conflicting with that riparian area, so the deck actually had to be redesigned, and you can see where the yellow line is and the black line. In order to still have some deck area, they actually wrapped the deck around the east side, the rear east side of the house, to still retain some deck area, but that deck has definitely been pulled back from the riparian buffer. In addition, a small 3-foot retaining wall has been incorporated behind the deck, and that effectively then reduces, as the property slopes off at the back of the property, and so that deck was appearing almost at an 8-foot height from the rear of the property. By bringing the deck back in towards the structure where the grade is not as steep, that reduced that visual appearance of the deck. In addition, incorporating the retaining wall, the 3-foot retaining wall, then steps it up. So it's a much softer elevation then. And then lastly, there's some minor grading changes that have occurred on the eastern side of the house, and that was really in an attempt to try to reduce the appearance of the face of the house on that east side. The proposed drainage swale and grades along the north and east side of the property are consistent with the approved PD and architecture and site application. And this modification really does help to reduce the visual height of the structure. The overall height has not changed, but it's because the structure's, the grade brings it up, it looks like it's less above grade, and so it does effectively reduce the visual height. These proposed changes are in compliance with the approved plan development, the EIR, and will result in minimal aesthetic changes to the approved streetscape. The slightly revised grading along the north and east side of the property will help to further reduce the visual mass of the structure and will be consistent with the approved drainage plans. The plan development process allows for minor changes. If it's a very minor change, it could probably be done at a, reviewed at a staff level and approved at a staff level. If it's a little bit more than a real minor, then we would usually agendize this with the DRC. In this case, due to the substantial neighborhood concerns about this from one particular party, we did have the Planning Commission review this. And on October 12th, the Planning Commission considered the application and unanimously took public testimony, received material from the appellant, and unanimously approved this 7-0. The decision to appeal to the town council was made on October 21st, and the basis for the appeal is that the Planning Commission erred or abused its discretion. According to the appellant, he feels an EIR should be required, an EIR amendment. A newer revised PD ordinance is required for the modifications, and that the EIR and subdivision for Linda Avenue project are being challenged in court. The documentation submitted for the appeal is nearly identical letter of opposition that was submitted to the Planning Commission and is covered extensively in the Planning Commission desk item, which is attachment 2 to your report that you had. Staff has determined the modifications are consistent with the approved plan development and that the minor modification to the footprint is necessary in order to comply with the mitigation measures that are contained in the environmental impact report as well as incorporated into the plan development. The EIR was certified by the Town Council on September 7th, 2010 and recertified by the Town Council on May 2nd, 2011. The EIR is current and none of the proposed minor modifications to the architecture and site require further environmental review. So consequently, staff is recommending the Planning Commission deny the appeal and uphold the Planning Commission's decision to approve the architecture and site application for 100 Costanzas Court. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Not for Ms. Rooney, I think it's for the town attorney. In reading the staff report, I noted that the Planning Commission heard this in October. We are hearing it in December, and in between, in November, the court had a hearing on a lawsuit related to this, and I just wanted the town attorney's input on what, if any, impact that court hearing would have on the decisions we're making this evening.
Thank you, Vice Mayor and council members. That is correct that this appellant has challenged this project at every step of the way, and a hearing was held before the Santa Clara County Superior Court on November 21st, challenging this council's approval of the final map, not the item before you tonight. And at that time, despite the appellant's request to the court to somehow delay this project even further than it's already been delayed over the years, the court declined to agree to any interim delay by way of an injunction or a stay and denied that request. They did hear oral arguments regarding the appellant's concerns about the final map process, and the court's taken it under submission. They have time to, that means that they have not issued a ruling, and there's nothing about the court action that in any way prohibits or prevents this council from taking action on applicant's application tonight.
Other questions for staff? Seeing none. Now I'll get to the public hearing. Did the appellant walk in while we were having the staff report? Apparently not, so we'll go to the applicant. If you'd like to come forward. Okay. Any members of the public? I have no cards on this item. You can still speak and bring me the card afterwards. Don't all rush to the mic at once. Okay. Applicant, did you want to rebut anything that was just said? Okay. And I'm guessing the appellant didn't walk in again. All right. I'll look to council for, we'll close the public hearing, and I'll look to council for discussion or a motion. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's evident in reviewing the Planning Commission's deliberation regarding this appeal that as staff recommended, the revisions of the plan are consistent with the plan development, the architecture and site, as well as the EIR. It actually improves the project and deals appropriately with an enhancement of the environmental rather than a degradation as was proposed. I also think that the legal issues have been asked and answered previously by the court, and I found that the unanimous vote of the commission to the motion made by Commissioner Bourgeois and seconded by Commissioner Telesfor affirmed that this action was taken very appropriately. So I will move to deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the Planning Commission to approve architecture and site application S11054.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Councilmember Leonardis?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Mayor, I have a follow-on motion.
Please.
And that's to adopt the resolution denying the appeal of a Planning Commission decision to approve an architecture and site application on property zoned R18 PD. This is attachment 14, as contained in our packet.
Okay. There's a motion. Is there a second? Councilmember Leonardis?
I'll second that as well.
Okay. Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Sorry that took so long for you. I have no other business for this evening. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, in the manager matters, I requested council consideration of adjourning tonight's meeting to a special meeting on Tuesday, December 20th for board commission interviews and the other business scheduled for Monday the 19th. As per the council code of conduct policy, staff would work with the mayor in terms of reviewing the scheduling of matters and the public notice to interested parties for that meeting.
Okay. So, Councilmember McNutt.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have my calendar with me tonight, so I am not in a position to commit to coming on the 20th. So if that was a lead up to a motion to make that decision tonight, I won't be able to vote on that.
It is simply to create the possibility of doing it, and then we would be polling all the council for their availability for a meeting on the 20th, and then the mayor has the authority to schedule items.
And this would be in lieu of the 19th or in addition to?
If we could move all items to the 20th, it would be in lieu of the 19th.
And if we could not move everything, then we would just leave things as they are on the 19th. Is that the intent?
It would be the mayor's call, per the council code of conduct policy.
Vice Mayor Spector.
And a question, what's the time frame that you anticipate for getting back to the council members?
We will poll the council tomorrow on their availability for the 20th, and we would have to make the decision by Wednesday because public notices for the one appeal that's on your agenda are scheduled to go out on Thursday.
Okay. Councilmember Leonardis.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if this has any bearing, but it looks as though I may have to recuse myself from the matter scheduled on the 19th because I own property within 500 feet of that hearing.
Okay, thank you.
So adjourning to a special meeting just simply creates the flexibility if the council is available and the mayor determines to move items from Monday to Tuesday.
Okay. So then that is what we're going to do this evening. We will adjourn to a special meeting, and we are adjourned.